Hello and welcome back to Chiff Chat, the organ podcast with me, Ben Blore, and I'm afraid I'm a bit poorly this week. Slightly scratchy throat, how fitting that this is the last episode and we're not going to go out with a bang, but rather a voice crack and a whimper. Even so, thank you very much to all of you who've tuned in to all 6 of these podcasts and for all your lovely emails and messages. My heart feels very warmed, although maybe that's just the Lemsip kicking in. I'll keep this intro brief for the sake of my own health as well as your patience, but just wanted to let you know that I recorded this episode in Cambridge early on a Sunday morning, having hosted an organ open day in London the day before and done some late night practice at King's College for a recital that happened soon after this recording. Before we recorded it too, I wanted to have a bit of a look around Cambridge and get some nice photos, because I don't go very often and it's so beautiful around there. So I thought, I'll go around the backs and get that iconic shot of King's Chapel. So I checked out of the room they'd put me in super early and wheeled my suitcase round Cambridge. There were 2 problems though. One of the wheels had broken off my case, so I might as well have been dragging around a burlap sack full of bricks behind me. And the other problem was that it was the Cambridge Half Marathon, so every time I thought I could go up a particular street, I'd get halfway up it and realise it was closed off. So in the end, I just found a cafe and sat at the window listlessly watching people far fitter than me run around Cambridge while I ate pancakes like a right fatty. Moving on from that, in my time-honoured tradition of not knowing how to do a segue, I've got a new organ CD coming out. It's called L'Orgue Gregorienne, recorded on the J.W. Walker organ at the London Oratory, and has loads of music based on Gregorian chant by composers like Duruflé, Tournemire, Cargelert, Alan, and a new commission by Matthew Martin. It's available on the Ad Fontes label, and you can pick up a copy from their website. Thanks to all of you who have already pre-ordered. I can only apologise that it's not reached you yet. We had an original release date of 3rd of May, but unfortunately, it's taken some cues from National Rail and it's been delayed. Not sure how long for, but hopefully won't be too long. It was a huge labour of love for me, so please do check it out if it sounds like it might be of interest to you. Right, so no use delaying the inevitable. On with the show. I'm holding in my hands a little pod, and I've just released it into a local puddle. Now all you need to do is cast your net out and bing bang boom, you've got yourself a podcast. Hello, you've made it onto the podcasty bit of the podcast for the last time. My final guest was, until recently, the Director of Music at Christ Church, Oxford, that wonderful city of dreaming spires, and he's just moved to be Director of Music at a college in a pokey old university in East Anglia. He's a rare triple threat of fantastic choral director, organist, and he's got a creamy tenor singing voice. He's the 2nd best organist to come out of Derby. It's Stephen Grahl. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Ben.
Did you like my introduction?
It was perfect.
No, seriously, Stephen is Director of Music at the amazing Trinity College Choir in Cambridge, who have a worldwide reputation for being one of the best student choirs around. How are you settling into the job?
Very well, thanks. Everyone here has been really welcoming. I'm very much enjoying working with the choir. We've done loads of interesting repertoire this term, and they seem to be tolerating me so far.
Great. Is it a different feel to the Oxford job?
Yes and no. The job's much the same, but it's a choir made up completely of student singers, and so it's not a children's choir, as opposed to Christ Church, Oxford, where we had choristers. So that's a difference, but that's no surprise to me. I still am Director of Schola Cantorum of Oxford, so I'm used to working with young, but very, very impressive singers.
You're still at keeping the Schola
going?
I'm
still travelling over to Oxford once a week to work with Schola.
That's great news. Well, obviously you're still finding your feet here. Have you got any long-term or even short-term aspirations for your time in charge of this brilliant choir?
The discography here is very impressive. We sing 3 services a week, so clearly the work in chapel is the heartbeat of what the choir does. We're touring this summer, and I shall continue to do that. I want to develop our concert work in the UK and further afield. I have a particular interest in new music, and my predecessors certainly shared that interest, so I want to continue to develop that. And also we have a very fine Metzler organ here, and I want to continue to encourage and support the organ scholars in using that instrument to its best advantage in concerts and in services.
It's a really colourful and versatile instrument, that Metzler, isn't it? If I ever had to record any Baroque repertoire to send off to competitions, I'd always try and make it to Trinity. Well, best of luck for the rest of your time here. Hope it's a long, fruitful career.
Thank you.
So thanks so much for sitting down to chat on this ill-thought-out podcast adventure. But really, I hoped it could just be a sort of trip down memory lane for both of us. I thought we could have a chat about our respective upbringings in Derby, and how that shaped us as musicians. So you're a couple of years older than me.
Only a couple.
Yeah. We were both choristers and organ scholars under Peter Gould and Tom Caulfield at Derby Cathedral. I had lessons with Peter and you learnt with Tom, I think.
That's right, yeah.
And it's hard to think of a better submersion into the choral world. Because with no disrespect to choirs like King's or Christchurch, Oxford, the children in the choir all go to the same school there. Whereas in Derby, to Peter's great credit, he would travel around to pretty much all the schools in the diocese and handpick the choristers. I still remember in assembly, being sort of tapped on the head to say that I'd been picked. And I don't know why, because I couldn't really sing, but there you go. Yeah, so I owe a lot to him. I remember he even came round to my house to talk to my parents about what a big commitment singing in the cathedral choir was. And they just don't make them like that anymore. I mean, how useful was your time in Derby to shaping your career?
Incredibly formative. I joined the choir like you at the age of 8. I too was chosen in my local primary school, and it was a big commitment, and my parents weren't quite sure, but in the end took me for an audition. The choristers there, when I sang there, went into the cathedral 5 times a week: Tuesday, Thursday, Friday rehearsal, and then twice on Sunday, with a couple of Sunday services a month.
Good memory.
In remission. Yeah, no, I remember it. And when I stopped singing treble, I continued and I turned the pages at the organ. I started to learn the organ. I had some piano lessons already. And so the majority of my musical training came from the cathedral. It is fair to say that I also was very lucky to have 2 excellent music teachers in the schools where I was, Murray Park in Mickleover, and then DeFerros High School in Burton, where I also got a lot and complementary music making. I learned a lot about playing jazz piano, for example, in those places. But it was at the cathedral that I wouldn't say I spent most time there, but I spent a lot of time there. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky to have great teaching, big repertory. And I remember Peter Gould saying to me, when you're playing something every week, you can be organ scholar. And so I must have been 15 or so at the time. And that spurred me on to do some practice. And pretty soon I was playing something each week. And then they made me organ scholar for my 6th form years at the cathedral.
Mm-hmm. Same with me. I remember my first psalm playing that. It was an absolute car crash. But actually it got better as it went on.
I do remember my organ teacher, Tom Caulfield, is the kindest man alive. Tom said one night, I think it's time you learn to improvise. Why don't you play before the service? And so I had to get on the organ and play.
Yeah.
And it was an environment where, of course, we were expected to play to a good standard, but we were also able to learn. Partway through my first live improvisation, Tom leaned over and said, I think it's time to modulate now. And so I think I forced some relative minor excursion as I sat and played. I also remember having to transpose a hymn for the first time in public.
How did that go?
I had not well.
Okay.
Not well. I hadn't been practicing enough, so Tom gently said, by the way, Gonfalon Royal is upper semitone. And yes, it wasn't my finest hour, but it did make me practice my transposition.
Yeah. Gonfalon Royal, that's a difficult one to start with.
That was mean. But it did encourage me to practice a skill which I have since used on an almost daily basis.
We'll talk about skills in just a bit. Because this is an organ podcast, we ought to talk about the Compton organ that we both learnt on as well. These are massively extended organs, so there's sort of fistfuls of stops, but only about 14 pipes inside the case. So even so, I find it a really exciting instrument to make music on, even if some of that excitement was sort of misplaced trepidation about, which stop is going to cipher today. And Tom Caulfield, who we both shadowed in his role as assistant master of music, he made that organ sound like $1 million. And he used to sort of cock his head to one side and make a sort of ch-ch-ch sound at all the difficult bits, like a train. But my abiding memory of him is that he could just play anything. It was so sensitive and well considered. He made that music.
Tom's a fantastic player, very musical player, played loads of repertory. He didn't repeat pieces very often. And he would... I turned pages for him for 3.5, 4, 5 years perhaps. And I can almost say I never heard him play a wrong note. I mean, that's not absolutely true, but his playing was so clean and so supportive as an accompanist. It wasn't possible to use those instruments with steppers and general pistons. Tom would accompany on the divisional pistons. There would be a flexibility. So if the choir was suddenly a bit louder, well, he'd close the swell box, add a stop, and then open the box. And it was a really significant learning experience to see Tom's really effective accompaniment. On the Compton organ, I mean, it's a mixed bag, isn't it, an extension organ. But that particular instrument I always thought had a lot of exciting colours. It wasn't completely reliable in those days. I think it still isn't. But it is an instrument that is exciting and also taught me as a student the skill of being able to listen to what's going on the organ when you're playing an instrument, a console that's away from the pipework. So in Derby, the console's halfway down the building, which on the one hand was quite tricky for a young player because the instrument lagged rather behind.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah. But it was also it's a skill one sometimes needs to play ahead and to separate the brain, the playing bit of the brain, and the listening bit of the brain. Now, I did practice in other places where the sound was much more direct, so I could hear what I was doing. But it certainly provided a kind of mental Sudoku when it came to playing certain fast pieces. Playing the Vidor Toccata at 50 metres was an interesting experience.
Yeah, yeah. It's really through Peter and Tom's encouragement and support that I ended up with an organ scholarship to New College, Oxford, where I did my undergrad degree in music. And you happened to be assistant organist there with Edward Higginbottom as director of music. So we spent 3 happy years working together through all the various highs and lows that came with making music in those less than ideal circumstances. And what I mean by that is the organ was tricky to manage, and in those days there were only 4 generals, so you had to reset everything after every piece. There was no camera, just a mirror at a 45-degree angle to the side, and even then, even songs were done in candlelight. So you'd be looking at the glare of the music desk in front of you, and then crane your neck round to look at this dim square of glass and try to get your eyes to adjust to the outline of the conductor before swinging your head back round to check the music again. Is that basically how you remember it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. The organs, I think it's a great organ, the New College organ. It's a very particular kind of instrument, and there were some advantages with not having lots of pistons, because it did mean one registered carefully.
Yeah.
And but if, for example, the entire organ had to be reset during the second lesson for the Nunc Dimittis, and the lesson was short, it could sometimes be a little bit sweaty getting the next registrations ready.
Well, it had this special button, didn't it, where you could press it and then it would kill the stop action, so you couldn't hear all the clunks and stuff as you changed. But you had to remember to turn that button off afterwards, otherwise you'd be left with the gamba as you went down to the first chord of Stanford in C or something.
Worse still, you turn the stop action off, push the stops in, then stand on the pedals with the pedal 16-foot reed drawn during a lesson, which I did once inadvertently do. So it was fraught with danger.
There was, at the end of a Eucharist that you were conducting, actually, I sort of dived into the finale of VN1 and hadn't put that button off, so it was really quiet on the Voix Celeste or something like that.
I don't remember that.
Oh, that's
so
good.
You got away with it.
Got away with it. Oxbridge is a funny old place. The terms are only 8 weeks, but I mean, crikey, do you work hard, particularly in the choral foundation or somewhere like Trinity, where there's a massive turnover of music and music that a lot of the time isn't run-of-the-mill stuff. I remember the services at New College, every single one felt like an event. You know, you were so often battling with tough organ management, poor light conditions, sometimes questionable conducting. But in a way, I kind of liked it. There was always this kind of electricity in the air, a bit like the Derby organ. You were always thinking, oh, what might go wrong today? I've been a little bit flippant, but all those conditions meant that I learnt my accompaniments to within an inch of their life. You know, most of the time I'd learn them so I could play them almost by memory, so I could look to the mirror on the side.
Yeah. It was certainly an exciting environment in which to work. I learned a huge amount.
How long were you there for?
7 years.
Okay.
Yeah. I went there in my late 20s as assistant organist, mid to late 20s. And I got a huge amount out of working with Edward Higginbottom. He's an absolutely brilliant musician, very fine organist himself, and hugely inspiring choir trainer, that the repertory was always interesting. And even if the repertory was stuff we all knew, one never quite knew what was going to happen next. And I mean that in a positive way. There was a genuine musical excitement. I mean, it certainly provided a lot of playing challenges, the expectation of being able to transpose and score read, and often at sight or sometimes at sight.
But he would never ask you to do anything he couldn't do himself.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. That is absolutely right. I remember being in a rehearsal of Schubert in G. The copies were new, so it was clear that Edward didn't know the piece already. And having started the Gloria and deciding it was a bit high, proceeded to play the whole thing down a tone without blinking and without going wrong as well. So it's absolutely true. We never were asked to do anything that Edward couldn't have come up and done himself. And this story is not from my time, but I gather there was an occasion when he asked an organ scholar to do something, and the organ scholar said, "If you want that, come up here and do it yourself." And so he did. It was a really formative time for me as a musician. And I found the New College Choir very exciting. All sorts of music I didn't know, and it was very exciting, but certainly demanding. And there were times when I was peering into the dark, where I wondered whether it might have been easier to have a camera. However, Edward's view that it was nice to have two-way communication through the mirror. I don't think I exercised the two-way communication too frequently,
as some did. Yeah. One of the perks of being in a well-established choir like Derby or New College is you get invited to do the choral evensong programme on BBC Radio 3 or the morning worship programme on Radio 4. One of the many great things about Peter and Tom at Derby, and I'm sure you found this too, was that they were willing to throw you in the deep end in the name of getting experience. So when the BBC van came over to Derby to record, and I think they did both programmes in one day, I was allowed as a 15, 16-year-old to play items in both services. And I think, I've got to double check this, but at the time someone from the BBC said I was the youngest person to ever play the organ for a live radio broadcast. I still remember I had to play the William Mathias piece, Recessional, which is a marchy thing that sounds a bit like Thunderbirds, but it's got an opening 4 bars that's pretty dissonant. So the producer at the time, I won't name names, said, "Oh, can you just leave that bit out, because the Radio 4 listeners will switch off if they hear that." Yeah, how's that for censorship?
Tritones must always be censored.
Yeah, quite. And then we did some broadcasts at New College too. That BBC red light never gets any easier, does it?
No. I think as one gets more experienced, one has an idea of how to prepare, perhaps a bit better. Although in my younger days, I don't think I did ever play live on the radio in Derby, but I certainly did when I went to Maud in Oxford, where I was organ scholar. And there was a sort of confidence that one might have at the age of 18 and 19, which would, I found most of the time, at least, carry me through difficult moments. Whereas at least when one's more experienced, I know what I've got to do if I'm going to play live on the radio. For me, the biggest challenge is that I'm normally quite relaxed as a player. So I'm able to, in a normal situation, be pretty calm and collected. But I now know about myself that when the light goes on, there's just a danger that one might lose one's nerve. And so the crucial thing is to have prepared enough. And I did a few competitions in my time, and I found those quite helpful for learning to deal with what it would be like on very little rehearsal time, having to play in front of a lot of people who knew things about organ music.
I mean, the Radio 3 evensong, it's quite contrived anyway, because it's an hour long and you've got to fill that hour. So you find a lot of places just doing Finzi, Low the Full Final Sacrifice, just to make up the time. As a director of music who's had to plan some of these kinds of things, I suppose the idea is to provide an accurate snapshot of the choir's abilities, perhaps with challenging rep, but without drawing too much attention to itself, so it becomes like a showcase or a concert. Do you know what I mean?
I think, in fact, the BBC never came to Christchurch during my time there. I don't know why. I assume it wasn't personal, but who knows?
Yeah.
It must have been me. But I did a couple of broadcasts in Peterborough, and in planning the music for those, I think I wanted to clearly choose something that was at least seasonal, and if not, better still, clearly related to the readings, so that the liturgy tied up together neatly. I wanted to do repertory that that I thought people would enjoy but not necessarily know. So I think I tried to put together programs of music that I knew the choir would sing well, because you have a duty when you're going live on the radio to put on a decent show, but also to sing things that might be interesting and engaging for the listeners. As you say, an evensong doesn't normally take an hour here, even with the longest music. And so without a sermon, an evensong ought to be comfortably under that time. Yeah. One does have to contrive to put in lengthy items or additional items in order to make up the time.
Well, I think at New College, in my time, we did two. You played for one and I played for the other. And the one I played for, everything in the service was transposed.
Is that right?
Apart from the voluntary.
I've forgotten about that, but it was probably an important part of your professional development.
Well, it was including a Bach motet. It was Lobet den Herrn, which was down from C to B major.
Right.
But I did it. You know, it puts hair on your chest. We also did the Mag and Nunc of Purcell in G minor, but Higgy hadn't decided if he wanted it in G minor or A flat minor. So I learnt it in 3 keys. I mean, that's a bit ridiculous, but I still did it. You know.
But in doing that, it gives you the transposition skills to move anything around those tonalities up or down without having to think about it too hard. So, for example, my transposition is always better down a semitone in certain keys, because when you play the St. John Passion, for example, down a half for rehearsals, you know the manoeuvre G minor to F sharp minor really well. And so if I'm then playing another piece in G minor, even at sight, at baroque pitch, down semitone, the brain just knows where you're going. So I always advise students when they're learning to transpose hymns or other things to practice things so they're ready to be done in performance. Learn it in the new key, but from the copy written out in the old key, and then play it in anger. So perform in a live situation, either down a semitone or up a semitone, whatever the transposition is, but making yourself prepare it really carefully, then playing it, gives you the skills that you need then later to do it at sight. Whereas if you poke around in private, getting it nearly right, you never get any better. So I always encourage people to learn less music in the wrong key, but to learn it really carefully and then perform it.
Well, I tried to console myself that it's made me a better musician rather than a deeply neurotic wreck of a man. Okay.
Well, it does show musical literacy.
Yeah,
totally. And when people come for auditions, I mean, the tests are not, in my view, party tricks. Rather, they're a way of people demonstrating a degree of musical literacy. And one's not expecting perfection, particularly from student players. Nonetheless, if people have the self-discipline to do some work at it, it does demonstrate, 1, dedication, and 2, a level of skill.
Let's briefly talk about organ scholarships. So, I mean, do you want to fly the flag for organ scholars? They do an awful lot of work alongside a full-time degree, and in some instances they basically take on the role of assistant organist. What do you look for and expect from your organ scholars?
Here at Trinity we have 3 services a week, and then we record and we tour, we broadcast. All of our services go out live on YouTube. So it's a schedule that's demanding but not overwhelming. The organ scholars here are not playing as many services as they might at foundations where there are 7 services a week. What am I looking for? Quite often our organ scholars take a gap year. That's almost always been the case. I'm not completely welded to that, but it does mean that someone's got flying hours and experience, usually in a cathedral environment where they've been able to learn some accompaniments. I'm looking for someone who's probably, by the time they arrive, at least at grade 8 standard and has a decent repertory of pieces, so that if they have to play, let's say, half the services in a term and a piece before and after, they're not scratching around learning new music the whole time in order that they're able to focus on their accompaniments.
It's important to have a range of repertoire that's not, you're not always playing your hardest grade 8 pieces, but, just some simpler voluntaries as well. I think
absolutely. And it's a source of pleasure when we had a service last week where we sang Rheinberger and Mauersberger, admittedly dice in F as well. And at the end of the service, the organ scholar played O Mensch Bewein. And it was just the perfect thing, with the last hymn had been a Mendelssohn, but Lutheran, a chorale of Lutheran origin, and the organ scholar, without any guidance from me, had just put down a Mensch Provide. And it was just an absolutely perfect match and perfect continuation of the atmosphere of the service. So, yes, all of one's pieces don't have to be 20-minute long, massive pieces of Liszt. In fact, it's probably better if they're not. Rather, you need some pieces. So they need some pieces, they need some accompaniment experience, they need to have a reasonably reliable technique, and I also need someone who is willing to work at it, is willing to take advice and direction. I tend here to spend an hour with each of our organ scholars each week, just to go through accompaniments. They also get organ lessons paid for with outside teachers. So we look after them well, but it is demanding. They also have a lot of access to the very fine instrument, the Metzler instrument here at Trinity.
We talked about this a bit already, but the Oxbridge keyboard tests, you've got to do some quite scary transposition, score reading, sight reading, harmonisation. I mean, they're pretty tough. Do you still see them as having practical use for the modern organ scholar in 2024?
Yeah, I do, I'm afraid.
That's fine.
As I mentioned, this idea of musical literacy, I think, is important. I have to say here, I wouldn't drop a transposition on my organ scores at the last minute. I just would take the view that I should give them a bit of warning. But if you're working in an environment where you're singing a service every day and colleagues are busy doing all sorts of other things, sometimes it is necessary to move things around at the last minute. And so I think it is important that people develop those skills. I'm not expecting people who come here to be able to transpose score read, sight read perfectly, but I do expect some aptitude for it, which I think is a signal, as I say, of having done some work and of a genuine musical literacy. And when you're accompanying a choir in an environment like this, you've got to be able to follow the conductor, to play the notes, to be listening, sometimes to be thinking, well, shall I go exactly with the conductor or do I stay with the choir? Is he trying to move them on? And the musical literacy you demonstrate through those tests is probably quite a good indicator of the ability to be a responsive and flexible accompanist.
For harmonisation, did you ever think to take the we plough the fields and scatter approach and just play the hard bits in octaves?
No, but I probably should have done.
Yeah. Well, my enduring memory of being your organ scholar at New College wasn't actually anything musical, but rather just playing High Noon on our phones. Do you remember?
Oh, I do remember that game.
It was a kind of Western theme game where you could connect with another person, then you had to swing your phone upwards and it said draw and the fastest person won. And you won every time.
Oh, did I?
You must have spent days of your life.
I must have spent a lot of time practicing that.
I mean, while we're reminiscing...
I don't still play it, I'm sorry to say.
Okay. While we're reminiscing, do you remember when I got an email from a super fan in broken English? And it said something like, "Dear Ben, I loved your playing it even song the other day. It was so good, it made me sense."
I do remember that.
Right, it was part of our vocab for
your
long
playing often made me sense.
Thanks. And then this is going way back now, but the first time I actually met you was on a Royal Schools of Church Music summer course in Bath, where you were teaching, and I was a student. I think I'd been offered the New College Organ Scholarship, but I hadn't yet gone.
Right.
And you'd earned the name Groovy Grahl on that course, because any time you were near a piano, you'd pounce on it and jump into a sort of Oscar Peterson routine.
Well, I think that's a generous assessment of my ability to play the piano.
We'd even go to that seedy pub in Oxford and with the sticky floors and listen to some jazz.
Oh yeah,
occasionally.
The Spin Jazz Club's still going,
with people sort of nodding their heads in time to the beat. Do you think jazz opens you up as a church musician? Are there skills that are shared?
I don't think you need it to be a church musician, but I think you can transfer improvisation skills. Of course, much of music in a jazz idiom is reliant on improvisation, at least to an extent. I mean, that's not to say one is permanently making it up in the same way as an organ improvisation. You're often playing things you've played before, but just in a slightly new way. So this stuff has to be practiced. But I do think that kind of flexibility and being willing to go with something in the moment can be useful across those two genres. And of course, the sort of 20th, 21st century harmonic language that some people like to play in is not all that far away from salon music, and which I suppose to an extent has certain links with the jazz as an idiom. So jazz I always thought was my chamber music. You know, I played more with a small group of other musicians when I was doing that. Sadly, I don't have any time for it these days.
Yeah.
But I'm open to offers.
There we go. Groovy Grahl. Now we're going to cap off this section with a quickfire round. Stephen, let me know the first thing that pops into your head, unless you prepared something, in which case just say that, I suppose. You can explain your answers a little bit if you want, or just give one-word answers if you want this to be over with a bit quicker. So, favourite organ?
Since we're sitting in Trinity Great Court, I think I'd have to say the Trinity College Metzler.
That's cheating a bit, but okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Favourite organ composer?
Bach. JS.
Okay, we've got a bit of a running thing. It's not a joke. I hesitate to call it a joke on this podcast. When the guest says their favourite composer, who inevitably isn't John Stanley, and then I say, "Oh, no one ever says John Stanley." There's nothing wrong with Stanley, of course, but I've just been using him as a sort of random punching bag composer whose music doesn't really leave an impression. So, could we just record one take where I ask you again and you say John Stanley?
We can do that. Yes,
okay.
No problem.
Favourite organ composer?
Always John Stanley.
Oh, that's great news. Could you name your top 10 favourite works of his?
Voluntary.
Yeah, good, okay.
Voluntary number 1, voluntary number 2.
In that order, yeah, great.
Yes.
Favourite performer, alive or dead?
That's tricky. I think I'm going to go with someone I've heard play a couple of times in the last year, and that's Thomas Trotter, who I think is one of the finest players around today. I've always enjoyed his performances.
Great choice. Favourite recording?
I'm going to go with Simon Preston's The World of the Organ on Decca, which was given to me when I was a child, probably long before I played the organ. But it's... I don't listen to organ music very much for fun, I'm afraid to say. Sorry about that.
What?
I know this recording must immediately be terminated. But Preston's playing has an incredible energy. It's on Westminster Abbey organ, which speaks with a real energy and clarity, particularly under his fingers and feet. So, The World of the Organ on Decca, Simon Preston.
Composer who never composed any organ music, but you wish they had?
Debussy, Ravel.
Okay. Cave Cole or Harrison and Harrison?
Cave Cole.
Evensong or Mass?
For the church service, Evensong. For the musical repertory, Mass.
But if I had a gun to your head?
These days I spend more time doing Evensong, but I...
Say Mass then. Okay, yeah. Great. Vidor or Vienne?
Vienne.
Good lad. Well done.
Although I do play a bit of Vidor.
Oh, okay. Rega or Cargelert?
Well, I've seen some of these categories before, and I wondered if I could be allowed a neither in exchange for both. And if I am allowed that, I'm going to say neither to Rega or Cargelert, although I do play a bit of music by both of them.
I'm doing a recital in King's College Cambridge tomorrow. I just dropped my name there. And, yeah, and I'm playing a bit of... I can't pronounce his name. It's a Danish composer, Ruud Langgaard. Have you come across him?
No.
It's like Rega, but a lot better.
Oh, see?
Yeah.
Shorter.
More tuneful, yeah.
Yeah, shorter and a bit less indigestible.
Exactly. Howells or Stanford?
It's Stanford's anniversary year, and he was music director at Trinity. So for that reason, I say Stanford.
Okay. Bach or Messiaen?
This is my both.
I don't know why I put them two together. I suppose they're both titans of organ music. And
if I'd had to choose, it would have been Bach, without question.
Yeah.
But Messiaen's important, and I think he's a wonderful composer.
Yeah. Oxford or Cambridge? I'm joking. No, you don't have to do that one. Socks or
no comment.
Socks or shoes?
Shoes.
Thank you. So now it's time to move on to Organ Heaven and Organ Hell. So if you listen to the rest of these, you know the drill by now, but for Stephen's benefit, he's going to tell me a piece he like and a piece he don't like, and he's going to try and convince me why he's objectively right. So Stephen, which piece are the angels heralding you with up above?
I thought I'd go for Dupré, Cortège et Litanie, partly because I thought it might give you an opportunity to argue with me. But I think it's a beautiful piece, tightly structured, two themes, both of them are lyrical, and I rather like that. Melodic first theme, plangent second theme with repeated notes. They're combined together in a rather glorious, resplendent E major at the end. So there's a sense of warmth, of hope, but also turbulence and struggle in the particularly in the second theme with the repeated notes.
Well, I'm actually not going to argue with you. I was going to say it's a good choice.
Good,
yeah.
excellent.
It's one of the few pieces of Dupré I play. I learnt it in the sixth form at Derby, so I used the Compton and its theatre effects to... Because I think he wrote quite a few versions of this. There's a piano transcription. I think the orchestral one was the original one, and then he wrote it for organ and orchestra, which he performed in the Wanamaker store in Philadelphia with...
I didn't know that.
Stokowski, I think, was conducting.
That's why you have a podcast and I don't.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Things.
Well, yeah. I mean, knowing Dupre's usual compositional style, which is sort of complex, academic and angry a lot of the time, this piece sort of sticks out to me because obviously there's still some chromaticism in there, but it's tonal and dare I say tuneful for him.
Yeah, it's got a tune.
Yeah.
I could sing you the tune. It's got a tune. I'm not going to, but it's got a tune.
But I think it is the diatonic litany theme that forces him to be a bit more normal.
Yeah. No, I think it's a piece of great warmth, and that's what draws me to it.
Mm-hmm. Surprise, you're not in heaven, you're sitting here with me recording a podcast, so you're actually in hell. What's just kicked in on Lucifer's jukebox?
I'm afraid it's Liszt's Ad Nos, which I've chosen. I've never played the piece, and it might be that if I attempted to get to grips with it, I might think it was worth the effort. I have heard it played by several really first-rate organists, and I'm ashamed to say I've never enjoyed it. Quite apart from anything else, it's extremely long. And I've never, as a listener, and I'm sure that the fault is mine, as a listener, I've never felt any affection for it. I've never been brought along by the narrative. The only thing that I walk away with is an admiration for someone who, A, has the technique, and B, can be bothered to play it. So I'm afraid Liszt's Ad Nos is in my room 101.
Well, when my guests tell me what they've picked ahead of time, I usually listen through to the hell item, try and sift through and find the positives, but I'm going to be honest, I couldn't even bring myself to do that this time. I heard it performed quite recently by a really good organist, and I was even following the score, and I just got so bored by about minute 5, and it's, as you say, it's about half an hour long. There's a lot of virtuosity with octaves, which is, I find, so unnecessary on the organ. It's basically piano music, isn't it?
Well, Liszt was a virtuoso pianist. Yeah. And that absolutely transfers into the organ. As I say, I'm not sure I've even troubled to look at the score. I probably own a copy, but I've not opened it.
I just wonder why you play this when you could play the Roibke instead, which to my mind it's got a better narrative structure and all the sections seem to hang together better, or if not, then they contrast in a way that sort of makes sense. Whereas with Liszt, I don't get it. It just goes on and on and on.
Well, it's a pity I've chosen pieces that we both agree on.
Yeah, sorry about that. There's no tension at all, is there?
Never mind.
This item's rubbish.
Yeah, coming from Derby, we can't possibly go up against each other.
I mean, I'm not a big fan of Liszt music anyway. I don't play BACH. I don't know if you do.
I do. Yeah, I have been there.
I don't know, I find it really overblown, and there's a massive reliance on diminished seventh chords. It's a parlour trick that he uses again and again. It's like, we get you trying to be, dramatic, but what else have you got?
But Liszt BACH, I mean, it depends on who's playing, but it doesn't take more than 11 and a half minutes, maximum of 12, I would have thought.
I mean, we've been quite negative here. Can we find anything positive to say about it, other than we like it that it's short and we like it when it ends?
I think it's dramatic and virtuosic, and I think it has about the right length to be enjoyable for the listener.
Are you a competitive man, Stephen?
Depends on the circumstances. If it's playing you at pool in the college bar, and by the way, winning at that, just thought I'd slip that in this podcast, occasionally winning, then yes, to a certain extent.
Well, do you enjoy pointless questions about organs?
Always, especially for this podcast.
Good, well, that's good because it's quiz time. So I've got 5 questions for you, and it's all multiple guess, so you won't be left in the dark. And can I just say to the listeners that if there's ever a series 2 of this podcast, I'm going to bin this item because can you imagine how difficult and not to mention tedious it is trawling through Wikipedia and nerdy internet organ forums looking for things that are even a little bit interesting to do with organs. It's absolute hell. In fact, that's my organ hell.
That's your organ hell. Yeah. Even right. Worse than Liszt's Ad Nos.
So now I've set the tone. Here's the quiz. Question 1. John Cage's organ piece, As Slow as Possible, is currently being performed on an organ in Halberstadt, Germany. The performance started in 2001, and the latest note change was just a few weeks ago at the time of recording, on the 5th of February 2024. In which year is the performance expected to end? A, 2099, B, 2350, or C, 2640?
I think it's 2350.
Nope, it's actually longer than that. So
Is
the
it?
answer's C, 2640. So a bit of background to this. The piece is called As Slow as Possible, but that's obviously left to interpretation. So naturally a group decided to take it to its most ludicrous conclusion and have it played over 600 years.
Presumably the church is deconsecrated, or does the piece continue to be played while services are held?
I think it's in a little
And what about the electricity bill? And what happens if the blower packs up?
All excellent questions. As long as there's power to the bellows, I mean, the organ can sound indefinitely, so I guess that's why they've chosen it as the instrument to do it. There's so it's a specially designed organ, and it's in a transept, so I guess it's away from officers and the main bit of the building.
But you'd expect to replace a blower
You
several times in that period.
I'm sure they've thought of that, and maybe there's a backup one that they can change to.
Yeah, okay.
While they do that, but they only add new pipes when a new note is introduced, so it's only got a dozen or so pipes.
Oh, so
at the
like
moment.
many organs, it's still in the process of being built.
Yeah, quite. So just a couple of things about this. The piece began on September the 5th, 2001, but it starts with a rest, which would be really annoying if you turned up to the premiere and sod all happened.
Well, with John Cage, that wouldn't be entirely surprising, would it?
So the first sound actually got made on February the 5th, 2003. As I mentioned, there was a note change recently, and it's become somewhat of a cultural event. People sort of flock from miles around to see something that's ultimately quite boring.
But it's a spectacle, and it invites you to consider the nature of, well, all sorts of things, I suppose. Music, existence.
Your own mental state.
Yes. Why anyone would ever want to engage in the performance of such a piece.
I saw footage of the recent note change, and it was slightly out of tune. So whoops.
But it's probably an unequal temperament.
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
You need to get with the programme with that.
And the last thing to say is this is obviously a bit of a meme piece. So running with an idea so ridiculous, what's the longest piece of music, but actually carrying it out. And the funniest thing is it actually isn't the longest piece of music, it's the second longest. There's an art installation in a lighthouse in East London called Long Player, which is a load of singing metal bowls controlled by humans and computers. And that's going to last 1,000 years.
Right.
So there you go.
But neither of the pieces have come to their conclusion yet, so we don't actually know which one ended up being the longest piece.
True.
Because there might be a failure in one or other pieces.
Oh, yeah. Have you got any time for this ultra-modern music or conceptual stuff?
Yes, broadly. But I suppose one might ask whether time and resources could have been diverted to something else.
Question 2. The 1991 Marc Garnier organ of the Tokyo Metropolitan Art Centre is notable for what reason? I'm going to be deliberately vague with my options here, so you have to use your imagination. A, it's actually 3 organs in one. B, the console can hover. Or C, the pipes are situated outside the concert hall.
B seems the only... Well, A or B are the only possible logical answers, but perhaps it's C.
Well, there do exist hovering consoles, and there are certainly outdoor organs where all the pipes are exposed to the elements. But in this case, actually, the organ is not just one organ, but 3 separate instruments.
3, okay.
Yeah, so it's a bit confusing. And most of the information I could find out about this organ is in Japanese, which wasn't particularly helpful. But basically, if you can imagine, you go into the concert hall, and in front of you, there's an enormous, quite imposing, austere-looking German Baroque sort of thing, with a massive facade. And from this 3-manual console, you can play stops that emulate the sound of a Svelink-style Dutch organ. And you can also pull out stops that would be found on a slightly later Bach-style organ. And the idea is you can use both stop lists for both organs if you want, but they're designed to be used separately. And then if you stand back, you sort of flip a switch, and literally the whole facade flips 180 degrees, and you're presented with a brand new set of facade pipes. The design's a lot more curvy, it looks a bit more harp-like and romantic. And the console is completely different, and now it's 4 manuals, and you can play romantic 20th century music on it.
Wow.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's better than one organ that tries to do all those things badly.
Well, I was going to say,
But it's a very expensive solution to having a concert hall organ.
to me, it's the absolute essence of just make up your mind. Apart from it apparently being wildly inconvenient and time consuming to change this around, I feel like when you get presented with an organ, you have to deal with what you've got. So, sort of like what you're saying, whether that means tying your repertoire to the style of the organ or trying to fit other music around that particular instrument's limitations. And I suppose this largely takes that out of the equation, but isn't that part of the fun of registering stuff on an organ?
Yes, it is. I can see why an educational institution might want to have several organs, each in different styles. That, I think, is a very positive thing. But having them all as part of the same organ does slightly smack of wanting to one-up the next town's concert hall.
Question 3. Kleis Orgelbau are an organ building company based in Bonn, Germany, and for whatever reason they seem to specialise in building organs that are located very high up in their respective buildings. But which one of these places has the highest situated organ? A. The Hallgrímskirkja in Reykjavik, Iceland. B. Cologne Cathedral in Germany. Or C. Bath Abbey in the UK.
Well, I've been to 2 of the 3 places. I've been to Bath Abbey.
Bath.
I thought you might correct me there. That's why I hesitated. And Cologne.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Bath. No, it can't be Bath. It might be. I think I'm going to go for the place I've not visited. But is it Cologne?
It is Cologne Cathedral. I think I've been there, but I think I've tried to block it out of my mind because it's. Just some quick stats. The nave there is about 40 metres or 140 foot high, and the organ is about halfway up, suspended by a handful of steel beams holding the crow's nest in place. So as you sit on the bench, you've got a 70-foot drop behind you. There's a lift up to the triforium level, and you've got to walk across some precarious planks, go out through a tiny door, and then jump across to the loft itself. So it's like a challenge from Total Wipeout, you know. Presumably that's where the organ sounds best in the building, but you'd have to have nerves of steel to play there every day, surely.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been. I used to go up to the Triforium when I was in Peterborough, and I would certainly keep away from the edge. There was reasonable safety precautions in place, but I would keep away from the edge. But I don't think I've ever been to an instrument where I've been afraid on the way to the console. But perhaps that one might be the one.
Question 4. According to folklore, apocryphal or not, a phone call took place between Henry Willis III, the builder of Westminster Cathedral organ, and Louis Vienne, the composer of Carol under Westminster. What apparently happened on that phone call? A. Willis hummed the tune of Big Ben to Vienne wrongly, or he hummed it correctly but Vienne misheard. B. They came up with an idea for a podcast called Chiff Chat, but sadly podcast didn't exist yet, so nothing came of it. Or C. I haven't actually written an answer for this one. I think I ran out of steam.
I think we both know
I've
the answer
basically
to
checked
this
this out. Yeah, go on.
Is A.
Yeah, it's a well-known story.
Was the phone line dodgy? Did Vienne misremember it? Carry on to Westminster is not completely accurate.
It's the second phrase. It's slightly. The more plausible likelihood is that he just took a bit of artistic license. I think for that. Do you play it?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, not for.
I try not to. It's really. I don't know, it gives me RSI by bar 2.
Yeah, I haven't played it for quite a while, but it's appealing and not too difficult and doesn't need too many registrations. So if you...
Ticks all the boxes.
That makes me sound terribly lazy. No. It does need the right instrument, though, but like most organ music, but you can make it work on a neoclassical organ. Mm-hmm. I'm not absolutely sure that it would sound brilliant here in Trinity, but one could probably make it work. The free wind might have a bit of trouble with the final section with the sustained notes on the top and the moving parts beneath. So that might rule it out for the instrument here.
And finally, question 5. On some old German organs, there would be a stop labelled Noli me tangere, meaning do not touch. If you were a naughty boy and did pull this stop, what would happen to you? A. A spring would be released, unleashing a foxtail into the face of the culprit. B. A small amount of gunpowder would be ignited, causing a mini explosion. Or C. Nothing at all, but you'd feel very guilty.
Let's go for the foxtail.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, a foxtail gets shoved in your gob when you pull it. Knowing your sense of humour, I thought you'd also like to know that this particular stop in German is called Fuchsschwank.
Well...
So
try taking your false teeth out and saying that.
Either that's actually true or someone online is winding me up. But if she's listening, I'd like to apologise to my mother. Well, thank you very much for chatting, Stephen. And now we're going to go and have a fancy pants lunch in Trinity Dining Hall before I sod off over the road to play a recital at King's this afternoon. In the knowledge that this podcast is listened to by at least half a dozen people, have you got anything in particular you'd like to plug?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think I've already plugged our Trinity live stream, so I suppose I'm duty-bound to do that. It's a way we bring our music for nothing to lots of people. So if you're interested in that, do. And also, I suppose I should plug, in general, Choral and Organ Awards, which are a wonderful way for young people, students, who want to learn more about choral music, want to enjoy the experience of singing in a choir, want to play the organ, and just to encourage people who are interested to make contact. Music directors in any of these collegiate environments are only too happy to give advice, to give support, and so all of us want to encourage people to engage with this wonderful form of music making.
Well, a lovely professional answer. Thank you very much. Well, this is usually the point where I ask the guest for a little soundbite I can use for promotional material, saying the Chiff Chat podcast is brilliant or something. But as this is the last one, doesn't seem much point in that. So let me just finish by asking you if you've had fun.
I've had a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
And would you say it's made you sense?
It has, in general, made me sense.
I'm so pleased. There we go, all finished. That's 6 whole episodes of the Chiff Chat Organ podcast for you, done and dusted. After 6 weeks of asking other organists the questions, I've been considering what my answers would be to the quickfire round, and for anyone interested, well, here you go. Favourite organ? I love playing my Walker at the London Oratory, and I think it's hard not to gravitate to the organ you spend most time playing. But I also remember Hereford Cathedral really left an impression on me. I recall everything just being in the right place and sounding just right, so perhaps I'd go for that. Favourite organ composer? I think this would be Derby. He didn't write a single duff note, and while I might never have a good enough technique to master the toccata, the Veni Creata, Prelude, Adagio and Variations is just sublime, and it's hard to top that in my book. A close second is John Stanley, obviously. Favourite performer, alive or dead? There's a Dutch organist called Matthias Havinger, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who makes Bach sing like no one else. Check out his video of the Bach Jig Fugue in G, where he just absolutely dances around the keyboards. It's so impressive and joyful. Favourite organ recording? Richard Pinnell actually got me onto a box set of the Vienne symphonies recorded by another Dutch organist, Ben van Oosten, and I absolutely wore that disc out when I was organ scholar. I just couldn't stop listening to it. For the composer who never composed any organ music, but I wish they had, I'd probably go with Stravinsky, like many others have said, or perhaps Poulenc. I couldn't quite believe it when Richard McVeigh dropped the bombshell that de Rufflet ghost wrote the organ part for the Poulenc organ concerto. What a revelation. Cave Cole or Harrison and Harrison? I love a good Harrison and Harrison organ, but the grass is always greener on the other side, so let's go Cave Cole. Evensong or Mass? A tough one. Liturgically Mass, musically probably Evensong. Vidor or Vienne? Vienne. Rager or Cargill? Come on now. Howells or Stanford? Always Howells. Bach or Messiaen? I think it has to be Bach. And socks or shoes? Socks. Though I do have a pair of organ shoes, and I do occasionally dust them off and put them on when I want to feel like a grown-up. But ultimately, it's just more comfy in socks, isn't it? Thank you very much to Stephen Grahl for rounding us off this week, and if you have enjoyed the podcast series, then please do check out the Chiff Chat video essays, available for free on YouTube, covering a spectrum of topics from the hardest organ music to what makes a good recital programme. As well as other videos of me playing the organ, I try to upload 2 new pieces a week, with quite a wide range of styles, so hopefully something for everyone, assuming you like organ music, of course. Or if you've missed any of the previous episodes of the podcast, you can check them out too, available on YouTube and most of the big podcast streaming platforms. There's about 6 hours of content in there, so if you're driving from Land's End to John O'Groats, you can listen to it 2.5 times over. I'm very grateful to all of you who've donated on TipJar. That's been a nice little bonus incentive for me to keep going. See the link in the description if you'd like to donate. Even a little bit is really appreciated. Thank you too, of course, to all of my wonderful guests, Richard McVeigh, Tom Bell, Martin Baker, Dan Malt, Richard Pinnell and Stephen Grahl, all terribly good sports, consummate musicians and decent blokes. Hopefully this is just farewell and not goodbye. I'll leave the door ajar for a series 2. Let me know if there's an appetite for that and who you think would make a good guest. You can still email me on podcast@chiffchat.com and I'll check in on that occasionally. But other than that, that's it. So as they say, all good things must come to an end, and so too must all mediocre things. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you around. Bye.